I almost didn't go. That's the part I think about most now, when I try to make sense of how a single afternoon in a frontier forest turned into something I still can't quite name. 7 years between that day and the one where everything changed, and the only thread connecting them was a scar on my left forearm that I'd stopped thinking about a long time ago. The summons came through the Frontier Liaison Office on a Tuesday. I was logging survey corrections in my office on the 3rd floor of the Vithara Settlement Annex, a cramped room with a window that faced the wrong direction and a heating unit that rattled every time the wind came in from the ridge. My supervisor knocked, set a paper on my desk, and left without explaining it. The header was in 3 languages. I read the one I knew. Chieftain Veth Cora of the Karathi host requests the attendance of Field Liaison Loren Cass at the Hall of the Long Table, Karathi seat, on the 14th day of the month of Veth. No substitution. Personal attendance required. I read it twice. Then I turned it over to see if there was anything on the back. There wasn't. I'd spent 4 years as a field liaison for the Frontier Office. Before that, 3 years as a settlement surveyor in the Lower Valley, learning which Karathi clans used which grazing corridors, and which watercourses were treaty marked, and which were contested, and which you didn't walk through without announcing yourself first. I knew the Karathi host by reputation, largest of the 4 highland clans. The one whose territory backed up against the northern settlement corridor, the one whose chieftain had held the long table for 22 years without challenge. I had never been called to his hall. I had never met him. I had never had any reason to. The only connection I could think of was a day 7 years ago I barely thought about anymore. I went. I drove the settlement road as far as it went, then climbed the rest of the way on foot with a pack that held 3 days of supplies because no one, Freya, the office seemed certain what personal attendance meant in terms of duration. The Karathi highlands in late autumn were the color of copper wire and old bone. The grasses long past their season. The wind coming off the upper ridge with an edge that got into your collar and stayed. I walked the marked path with my liaison papers folded in my inside pocket and tried not to think too hard about why a chieftain who had never acknowledged my existence wanted me in his hall. I thought about it anyway. The Karathi are not a small people. That's the first thing you notice when you work the frontier long enough to actually meet one face to face, rather than seeing them at distance across a survey marker or reading their clan designations on a treaty map. They run tall and broad, copper-bronze skin that carries the highland sun differently than human skin does. Holds it, seems to absorb it, the way hammered metal holds heat. Their eyes are reflective in low light, gold amber, and in direct sun they have a quality that makes you feel briefly like the thing being looked at, rather than the one looking. Their hair they wear in elaborate braids specific to clan and rank, the colors ranging from near black to deep crimson brown, and the braids are not decorative. They're a record, I'd been told, of lineage and standing and deeds. I'd never been confident enough in my reading of them to try interpreting what I was looking at, so I'd learned to keep my eyes at a polite middle distance when speaking to Karathi at any formal level. The Hall of the Long Table was built into the rock of the upper ridge, its front face of stone cut into the cliff, and the interior extending back into it, so that standing outside you saw only a carved entrance arch, twice the height of a human door, and a set of steps that had been worn smooth, centuries of foot traffic. 2 guards in matte black armor stood flanking the arch. They saw me coming from a long way off. They didn't move. I took as either good news or very bad news, and I couldn't determine which until I was close enough to read their posture. Neutral. Not hostile. Not welcoming, neutral in the way of people who have been told to expect me. One of them held out a hand, palm up. I gave her my liaison papers. She looked at them for what felt like a full minute. Her partner kept his eyes on the path behind me, scanning the approach the way frontier guards scan. Not because they expect anything, but because the habit is too old to stop. The highland wind moved between us. A bird I didn't have a name for called once from somewhere in the cliffs above and then went silent. She gave my papers back. "The chieftain waits," she said in accented standard. I went in. The interior of the hall was lit by long channels, cut in the ceiling that admitted daylight, and sent it in pale bars across the stone floor. The long table itself ran the length of the room, actual stone. Low by human standards but sized for Karathi proportions, seating on both sides. At the far end, on a raised section of floor, was a seat that was not quite a throne and not quite a chair, carved from the same rock as the walls, and in it sat a man I understood immediately to be Veth Kora without needing anyone to introduce him. He was older than I'd expected. Late 50s by his look, or whatever the Karathi equivalent was. The braids in his dark red hair were more numerous and more complex than any I'd seen on the Karathi I'd worked with in the field, and they shot through with silver in a way that looked less like age and more like something deliberate, purposeful. His face was the face of someone who had been making decisions that affected large numbers of people for a very long time and who had come to peace with what that cost. He looked at me the way a surveyor looks at a feature on a map, taking in the relevant information, forming a judgment, holding it. Standing to his right was a young woman I had never seen before and recognized immediately. I don't know how to explain that, but it's the truth. She was in her mid-20s, dressed in the dark formal attire of the Karathi Highland clans, copper bronze hair in the elaborate braids of rank, her gold amber eyes finding mine across the full length of that hall the instant I walked in. And something in the back of my memory, not a clear image, more of a shape, an impression, turned over and resolved. A girl, running, the forest, creek bed. The sound before I understood what was making it. I had been 22 years old and 3 weeks into my first surveying contract. I'd been walking a lower boundary line alone, which I wasn't supposed to do but did because the senior surveyor I was with had developed a bad knee and the boundary didn't mark itself, and I'd cut through a section of the forest I didn't know well. The creek bed was dry that time of year, the stones pale and smooth underfoot. The trees on either side dense enough that the light came through in pieces. Heard something to my left, a crack. The way a large branch cracks when weight is applied to it suddenly, and I'd turned and seen two things at once. A girl running hard toward me along the opposite bank of the dry creek, and behind her, closing ground, a Vithara ridge predator. I'd never seen one outside of survey safety briefings. They're low to the ground and very fast, and they have a gait that's wrong in a way that's hard to look at directly, a mechanical fluidity that your brief instincts vote to freeze. The briefing said not to run. The briefing said to make yourself large and loud. The briefings did not account for a girl in the path of one, moving faster than I would have thought possible and not going to get clear in time. I don't remember making a decision. I remember stepping off the bank into the creek bed, into the predator's line of approach, and I remember putting my arms out, and I remember the impact on my left forearm that knocked me sideways into the stones. After that, there are gaps. There was noise, a great deal of it. There was at some point, not noise. I came to lying on my back in the creek bed, with my left arm held against my chest and my head ringing, shh. And the girl was crouching over me, and she said something in a language I didn't know, and her eyes were amber gold and enormous, and she was looking at me the way people look at things they don't know how to account for. Tried to tell her I was all right. I don't know if the words came out in any order. When I woke up, I was in the settlement clinic. The doctor told me the forearm had been compressed. The predator's strike, she said, not a full bite, more of a deflection, was why I still had the arm. I had a significant contusion and 2 fractured bones, and I'd be in a splint for 6 weeks. When I asked about the girl, the doctor looked at me as though I'd said something in a foreign language. What girl? I described what I'd seen. The doctor asked where I'd been walking. I told her. She exchanged a look with the nurse that I didn't have the vocabulary to interpret at the time. You were alone when the patrol found you, she said. The report says alone. I let it go. I had 6 weeks of recovery to get through and a contract to finish after it, and the frontier doesn't hold space for mysteries you can't afford to spend time on. I filed my incident report. I did not mention the girl because the doctor had just told me. The patrol report said I was alone, and I was 22 years old and didn't yet know enough to push back on a patrol report. The scar healed rough, the way forearm scars do, and for a while it pulled when the weather changed, and then it stopped doing that too, and eventually it became just another piece of the physical record of what surveying in the lower Highland corridor meant for a person's body over time. 7 years. I stood at the near end of the long table in the hall of Ethicora and looked at the young woman standing at the chieftain's right hand and understood, with a clarity that was almost physical, that she had been looking for me for a long time. The chieftain rose. He didn't do it the way officials rise at official functions, the careful choreography of ceremony. He stood the way a man stands when something he has been waiting for has arrived. The motion simple and weighted. The members of his court, there were perhaps 20 of them ranged along the sides of the table, rose after him, silent, watching. "Lauren Cass," he said. His standard was better than the guards had been, precise, measured. "Field liaison, Vethara Frontier Office." "Yes," I said. "Chieftain, come forward." I walked the length of the table. It took longer than it should have. My boots were loud on the stone floor. When I stopped, I was close enough to see that the chieftain's eyes, amber gold like his daughter's, were wet at the inner corners. He didn't look away from mine. "My daughter," he said, "came home 7 years ago without an explanation, I believed. She was unhurt. She would not say what had happened in the lower forest, or why she had gone there alone, or what she had seen. She said only that a human had been in the creek bed, and that the human was gone when her escort reached the location." He paused. "I had the patrol report reviewed. I had the settlement clinic records reviewed, as far as a diplomatic request would reach. I had descriptions gathered of every human surveyor active in that corridor in that season." He looked at me steadily. "You were the only one who filed an incident report citing a ridge predator strike. You cited only yourself, no witnesses." "I was alone," I said. And then, because it was the truth. According to the report, something moved across his face. Not a smile, not quite. Something older than that. "My daughter tells me," he said, "that you stepped into the path of the predator. That you put your body between the animal and hers. You did not run." He let that sit for a moment. "She was 14 years old. She had gone to the lower forest without permission and without her escort, because she was 14 and believed she was more capable than she was. She was wrong. You were a stranger, a human in territory that is not yours by birth or by bond. You had no obligation. You had no reason." "I had a reason," I said. He waited. "There was someone in the path of something dangerous," I said. "That's a reason." Was quiet enough that I could hear the wind working in the ceiling channels above us. "I am going to ask you to do something," the chieftain said. "And I want you to understand that what I ask is unusual, and that I ask it as a request, not as an order. The Frontier Office has no authority here, and I am not invoking treaty protocol. I am asking you, as one person asks another." He held my gaze. "Show me your left arm." I looked at him. I looked at his daughter. Her expression had not changed, composed, those amber gold eyes steady. But she was very still in the way of people who are holding themselves, still deliberately. Reached up and unfastened the cuff of my jacket sleeve. I pushed it back to the elbow. The scar runs from the inside of the forearm to the outside, crossing the bone obliquely, pale against the skin I've developed after years of working in the highland sun. It's not dramatic. It doesn't look like much if you don't know what made it. But it's specific. The pattern of a ridge predator's strike at speed is not something that happens any other way. The chieftain looked at it for a long time. Then he turned to his court, and I saw something happen in his face that I don't have precise words for. The nearest I can get is that he had been carrying something for 7 years and had just set it down, and the setting down was visible. He spoke in Karathi. His daughter translated for me afterward, but I want to be honest about what I experienced in the moment, which was that I understood nothing of the words and everything of the weight behind them. The court listened. No one moved. And then, one by one, they lowered themselves. Not onto both knees, the way human ceremony tends to go, but the Karathi bow, which is a specific thing, upper body parallel to the floor and the right fist pressed to the left shoulder, gesture you make before something you recognize as greater than your expectation. 20 people. I stood there with my jacket sleeve pushed to my elbow and tried to locate something solid to think. Ressa, the chieftain's daughter, whose name I would learn in the next few minutes, stepped down from the raised floor and came to where I was standing. She was the same height as her father. She looked at the scar with the same directness he had. He said, she told me, In standard, that was considerably better than anyone else's in the room. This mark is what remains of an act of kinbond. A human's stood between a Karathi daughter and death, for no reason that interest or obligation could explain, and he did not ask for his name to be remembered, and he did not offer a price, and he did not run. He bore what the animal gave him, and called it a reason. This is worth more than rank. This is worth more than treaty. This is worth more than 7 years of searching for one face in a corridor of 1,000. She paused. She was looking at me directly, and there was something in those gold amber eyes that was not quite the expression I'd seen on the face of the girl in the creek bed 7 years ago. That had been shock and something very young, but it contained it, the way a river contains the headwater that made it. He also said your name before his court, she said, and asked them to know it. That is not a small thing. Among the Karathi, a name said before the long table is a name the clan holds. I looked at the chieftain. He was watching us with the patient attention of someone who has waited 7 years and is content to wait a few minutes more. I didn't know who she was, I said. I meant it as a clarification. I didn't want him to think I'd been making a calculated gesture, that I'd known whose daughter I was shielding, that there had been any reasoning involved at all. I know, he said. In standard this time, careful and clear. That is precisely the point. He came down from the raised floor himself then, and did something I had not anticipated, was that he extended his right hand in the human fashion. Not a Karathi greeting, a human one. Deliberate. The gesture of someone who has spent 7 years learning what gesture to offer when the moment came. I shook his hand. His grip was what you'd expect from a chieftain who had held the long table for 22 years. Steady, certain, pressure of someone accustomed to things needing to be confirmed through contact. He held it for 3 beats and released. You will stay, he said. There is much I want to say to you, and some of it requires more than an afternoon. My house has rooms for guests. They are yours for as long as you choose to use them. I should send word to the frontier office, I said. I will send word to the frontier office, he said. And the way he said it made clear that the frontier office would have no difficulty understanding the message. That was the first evening. There were 3 more after it. I want to be careful about what I say happened in those 3 days, because I'm aware of how easy it is to make a story out of something that was quieter and stranger than any story shape allows for. Veth Kora was not a man who explained himself easily, and I was not a man accustomed to being in halls where the history went back further than the settlement road. What I can say honestly is that we talked. We talked about the lower corridor and the treaty boundaries, and the things the frontier office understood and the things it consistently failed to understand. We talked about the highland grasses and what 7 years of grazing changes in the soil composition and what that means for the next generation's planting. We talked eventually about the day in the creek bed, which he had been carrying the way you carry something that can't be set down until you have the right surface for it. He had found me, he said, because his daughter had never let him stop looking. She had been 14, and she had come home and told him a human stepped into the path of the predator, and she had never offered that detail as a thing to be curious about and then set aside. She had offered it as a thing that mattered, and she had kept offering it quietly, consistently, across 7 years, until he understood that she needed him to find the human and say the thing that needed to be said. On the second evening, Ressa sat with us. She didn't speak much at first. She listened, in the way I was learning was characteristic of her, absorbing rather than reacting, holding what she heard until she knew what she thought. But at some point in the evening, her father said something to her at the and she answered him in Karathi. And I had the distinct impression that the exchange was about me, and that it was not unfavorable, and that whatever she said had the qualities of something that had also been held for 7 years waiting for the right surface. She says you have the same expression now that you had then, Veth Kora told me. What expression? She says. The expression of someone who acted without thinking, and has never quite worked out whether that was good judgment or foolishness, and is not entirely interested in settling the question. I thought about that for a while. That's accurate, I said. Ressa looked at me, and one corner of her mouth moved in a way that I thought was probably as close to open amusement as she usually got. And something in my chest rearranged itself slightly, and I noted that fact and kept it to myself. On the third day, the chieftain asked me formally what I wanted, not in the transactional sense. Not in the sense of what payment I expected or what treaty concession I might accept. He asked what I wanted in the way of someone who understands that a question like that, asked correctly and sincerely, deserves an honest answer. I told him I didn't know that I wanted anything. I told him I'd spent 7 years not knowing who the girl in the creek bed was, and that the answer had turned out to be the daughter of the chieftain of the largest highland clan, and that I was still working out what to do with that information. He was quiet for a moment, then he said, "You could stay. Not as a guest. As a liaison who works from within the clan territory rather than from the frontier annex. The work would be the same. The ground you'd be standing on would be different." I looked at him. "My daughter," he said with great deliberateness, "has spent 7 years in possession of a piece of information that she believed was important. She has not acted on it because I asked her not to until I could find the human it concerned and look at him myself." He held my gaze. "I have now looked at you for 3 days. I have heard what you said in my court, which is that a reason was a reason. I have seen what is on your forearm. I am a man who has held the long table for 22 years, which means I have had to look at a great many people and determine which ones would behave under pressure the way they presented themselves at rest." A pause. "You are consistent, Lauren Cass. I find that rare." I didn't say anything. "I am not making you an offer of anything except a post," he said carefully. "I am not speaking for my daughter or making promises on her behalf. She is 21 years old and capable of her own choices, and would be angry with me if I implied otherwise." He glanced toward the far end of the hall, where she had been an hour ago and was not now. "I am only telling you that if you chose to be present, the ground would be different. And the ground matters." I left the hall the following morning before dawn. The highland air was the sharpest it gets, and the sky was still the color of iron. Ressa was in the entrance arch when I came out with my pack. She didn't say she'd been waiting. She was simply there, in the way of someone for whom being present is not the same thing as making a claim. Stood in the entrance arch for a moment. "He talked too much," she said. "He said what needed saying. He always says more than what needs saying. It's his principal flaw." She looked at me directly, the gold amber eyes steady in the gray pre-dawn. "The post is real. The ground being different is real. A beat. I am not the reason to take it. But I am not the reason either, and I want you to have accurate information." It was the most direct thing I'd ever heard anyone say to me, before or since. I stood in the entrance arch of the Hall of the Long Table with my pack on my shoulder and the highland wind in my collar and thought about a dry bed and a girl running and the moment before the decision that wasn't a decision, the moment of just doing the thing because the thing needed doing. "I'll send word to the frontier office," I said. "They'll have questions. They will." "My father will handle the questions," she said. "He's been waiting 7 years to handle questions. He'll enjoy it." I looked at her. She looked at me. The sky to the east had gone from iron to pale copper, the highland ridgeline catching the first edge of the sun. "The scar," she said. "Does it still hurt?" "No," I said. "Hasn't a long time?" She nodded once. Earthy nod that means something has been confirmed rather than simply heard. "Good," she said. And then, "Lauren Cass, my father said your name before the long table. The clan holds it now. That means something here in case no one has told you." "No one told me," I said. "What does it mean?" she considered. "It means you have a place," she said. "Not a duty, not a debt, a place. Among the Karathi, the distinction matters." The sun came over the ridge then, full and copper gold. Kind of highland dawn that makes the whole upper corridor look like something that was built rather than grown. Ressa turned back toward the hall entrance. She didn't look back. "Take the post," she said over her shoulder, in the tone of someone who is not issuing an order and knows they don't need to. I stood in the light for a while longer. Then I started down the path toward the settlement road, already working out what I was going to say to my supervisor, and what he was going to say to his supervisor, and how long it was going to take before anyone at the frontier office understood that the alignment of the Highland corridor had just shifted in a direction that was going to require some adjustments in how they drew their maps. I had a reason. I still do.